Joining us, Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy. He sits on Senate Foreign Relations. Senator, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So why is it a bad thing to take out Nicolas Maduro?
Well, I mean, this has nothing to do with American national security. Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy, but apparently he is being replaced by his second in command, a vice president who is just as committed to transporting drugs out of Venezuela, mostly to Europe, is just as committed to political repression as Maduro was. So life on the ground doesn't change at all for the Venezuelan people. There's likely no change in the amount of drugs that's leaving. But of course, those drugs weren't coming to the United States in the first place. The drugs that leave Venezuela, almost exclusively cocaine, goes to Europe, not to the United States. So this also doesn't have any impact on the scourge of addiction in this country. So the question is, what is this really about? If it's not about the drug trade, if it's not about restoring democracy in Venezuela, if they just substituted Maduro with someone equally as bad for the Venezuelan people, who's benefiting? And I think what we're learning is that it's the oil industry and Wall Street that's benefiting here. That Trump is telling you, I mean, every day, that what he's most interested in is getting his friends' hands back on the oil that will make a whole bunch of money for the oil industry. And as Venezuelan bonds start to improve, will make a whole lot of money for Wall Street investors who bought those distressed assets. So it doesn't seem like there's any payoff for the American people here, whose health insurance premiums are skyrocketing as we speak. The payoff here just seems to be for a bunch of, very, very rich people on Wall Street and in the energy industry.
Well, there's questions about that, though, about whether Wall Street or the energy industry, oil companies, really do want to get back into Venezuela. There's questions about whether, if this regime that's currently in place does want to work with the U.S., and if it can work with the U.S., if it can do so effectively. There are questions about insurgency. The population of Venezuela is very heavily armed. So the idea that it's going to make oil companies wealthier or give us a hand in the oil or the rare earth minerals that Venezuela holds, which is quite a bit, how likely is that, given if we are just to leave the regime in place and not put troops on the ground?
Well, I mean, let me put a broad caveat on everything that I am saying. As you know, the administration has not briefed the United States Senate, which is extraordinary in and of itself. And when they did brief us just 2 to 3 weeks ago, they came to tell us that they were not engaged in regime change. They told us that they were conducting targeted strikes against drug traffickers. So even when the administration has come and told us what their intent is, they don't tell the truth. But yes, it's my belief that the oil industry would love to get into Venezuela. Yes, it's an old infrastructure. It would take years of improvements, but this is still the most significant petroleum deposit in the world. There is no way that the major American oil companies don't want a piece of that action. But what also happens at this moment is that the Venezuelan bonds start to look a little bit more appetizing, and there are a lot of allies of President Trump, a lot of folks on Wall Street who are making a lot of money as their investments start to look a little bit wiser. It's all to say that I just haven't been able to figure out what the benefit is to my constituents yet, who are literally going through hell as we speak. Premiums going up by thousands of dollars, kids losing their nutrition benefits. Yes, it's a little bit uncertain as to what the future of American oil prospects are in Venezuela, but it seems like that's the only group right now that's benefiting.
Do you not see this as, or do you see this as a parallel to Iraq, or do you see it as a parallel to Panama? What is the comparison that you can make for what we did here in Venezuela? Well,
I don't know that there is a perfect parallel, in part because we don't know what the next several weeks looks like. I mean, my guess here is that Trump thinks that he's going to be able to control the decision-making of this well, it's not a new government, control the decision-making of Maduro's lieutenants that he's left in charge of the country by threatening another invasion, which he has said openly. That, of course, would be a terrible idea. There are all sorts of very well-armed groups inside Venezuela that would provide fierce resistance. So I would hope that we aren't going to get involved in a ground war in Venezuela. But my guess is that the Venezuelans probably know that. And thus, the very bad people that have been left in charge, Maduro's lieutenants, are probably going to thumb their nose at the requests for compliance by the Trump administration. I don't know that there's a precedent for that. America coming in, removing a leader, allowing his party and his movement to stay in charge, and then in the long run, not really getting much for it. That seems to me to be the most likely outcome right now. But again, there's been no briefing for members of the Senate or members of the House, so we're all guessing.
There's going to be something of a briefing a little bit later today, and maybe there'll be a plan presented in that briefing. We're going to wait and see if it's one that can even be shared with the American public, which is asking for a plan, obviously. A lot of hangover from Iraq and Americans not wanting to get into that all over again. Certainly a lot of Americans voted for Donald Trump because they didn't want to do that all over again. If there is a need, if the administration comes and says there is a need for boots on the ground in Venezuela to secure the country, because say it does fall apart, say a vacuum is in place and no one wants ISIS, or not ISIS, obviously, but an ISIS version of things to pop up, and there is a vote in Congress for boots on the ground in Venezuela, how do you vote?
Well, I mean, none of my constituents are looking for American troops to go to Venezuela to secure the oil fields so that the American oil industry can get rich. Of course, you're talking about a future hypothetical scenario. So, of course, I can't tell you how I would vote.
I'm just talking about the experience that we had in the recent past, and it's the best one that I can lay out for what could happen, because who knows what might happen.
Listen, a lot of people in this country are very surprised that there was an invasion, even in a time-limited manner, because they thought by electing Donald Trump that he was going to keep us out of wars. The fact of the matter is there are a lot of folks that profit from war. There are a lot of people surrounding Donald Trump probably telling him that if he put ground troops into Venezuela, we would be welcomed as liberators, as people advised George Bush on Iraq. The American people do not want our troops overseas again to protect oil assets. If that vote ever came up in the United States Senate or the House of Representatives, I don't think there would be a majority in either chamber for it, because it would be Republicans and Democrats who would be filling the streets trying to stop another American military misadventure abroad.
What do you say to Venezuelan Americans or those who have fled Venezuela who are very happy today and believe that Maduro was bad and needed to be taken out, and they have examples of just how awful he was, and he was awful for the country. What do you say to those who are celebrating?
Well, I don't know that they're going to be celebrating when they find out that this new government under Delcy is just as repressive. Obviously, we went from Chavez to Maduro and got an equally repressive regime. It appears that Trump is contemplating doing a deal here in which he allows for Maduro's people to stay in charge. He allows for the repression to continue in exchange for access for American oil companies to the natural resources. If that's the result here, then you are not going to have Venezuelan Americans cheering in the streets for long, because they are going to find out that they got conned, that they got promised by a bunch of neocons that America would go in and take out the despotic regime in Venezuela, and they didn't do it. They just took out one guy and his wife and left the regime in place.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy, really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you, as always, for giving us so much of your time.
Appreciate it.